Thanks to the internet, learning Chinese is now more accessible than ever, and you can do it completely for free. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should, however. If you have money to invest, here's how to do so with the greatest impact. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about money and when and how money can help you learn Chinese faster. This episode is released in the week leading up to Black Friday, and around this time of year, we are all bombarded by offers, deals, and discounts, and everybody seems to be after our money. I'm no exception. I have courses that I sell that are also on discount this week, and for more information about that, check the link in the show notes. In this week's episode, I'd like to discuss the role of money when learning Chinese. Let's start by reiterating what I said in the introduction, namely that you can learn Chinese completely for free. There are many great resources available for free, and you can rely on these to reach your goals. You do not need to spend a single dollar if you don't want to. In the article on Hacking Chinese, I've listed resources for listening, speaking, reading, writing, and vocabulary that are completely free, so if you want links to those, please check the show notes. When it comes to listening, there are so many good resources for free, and I compiled the best of them in an article called The 10 Best Free Chinese Listening Resources for Beginner, Intermediate, and Advanced Students. So for free listening, check that article. When it comes to speaking ability, you can practice with people you meet either online or offline, maybe in a language exchange, which makes it free. You're exchanging your knowledge of your language with their knowledge of theirs, and no money needs to change hands. When it comes to more specific aspects, such as pronunciation, there is also a lot of material online. I, for example, have published a complete guide to Chinese tones, and there's a ton of resources on YouTube. I collected more resources for improving your pronunciation a while back in an article that I linked to in the show notes, and while not all of these are free, many of them are. Next, we get to reading, and just like with listening, there's plenty of reading material online suitable for various levels, available for free. I've collected my favorites in the 10 best free Chinese reading resources for beginner, intermediate, and advanced learners, and as usual, I'll put links in the show notes. Finally, if you have access to a good public library, you might be able to find many reading resources and textbooks in that library for free. When it comes to writing, the first thing you should do is to read more, which we just covered. Beyond that, you can treat writing as speaking, so you can practice with people you meet online or offline, and if need be, you can offer something in return for them helping you with your Chinese, such as you helping them with your native language. Next, we have vocabulary, which you should mainly learn through listening and reading, which we have already covered. But it's also great to have a good dictionary, and here you can check out Pleco or Hanping, for example. If you want a powerful flashcard app, you can check out Anki, which is free online and on Android. Finally, when it comes to guidance, or figuring out what to do next and how, there's also plenty of advice available online, including Hacking Chinese, of course. I've written over 500 articles and recorded more than 200 podcast episodes, and these are all free. If you want advice from somebody who isn't me, there are also many websites dedicated to answering your questions and discussing how to best learn Chinese. And again, I'll put links to these in the show notes. I think that this has made it abundantly clear that you can learn Chinese for free. Like I said in the intro though, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. I think there are several areas of language learning where investing money can make a significant difference, and so that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this episode. As a disclaimer though, I have an incentive to say that it can be impactful to invest money into your learning because I'm also selling courses that purport to help you learn Chinese. But I don't think that's a good reason to not talk about this at all. But do keep in mind that I of course benefit when people buy courses from me, and that Hacking Chinese wouldn't exist if it weren't for people buying my courses. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some reasons why you might want to invest money into learning Chinese. The first one is that investing money can be convenient and save you time. For example, let's say that a podcast that you like doesn't come with transcripts for free. Yes, you could take the audio files and run them through some kind of transcription software and get the transcripts that way and then study them. But this is rather tedious, it takes a lot of time and is a bit of a hassle. And you could just have used all that time to learn more Chinese instead. So not spending money usually means that you need to spend something else, time in this case. The next reason you might consider paying for learning resources is that paid resources are usually of higher quality and more enjoyable to use. Perhaps there is an app that is completely free, but it's not updated, it doesn't look very nice, and it's simply not very appealing to use. Or you can find audio recordings you'd like to use, but because the people who recorded them for you aren't professionals and didn't get paid, well, they might have used a worse microphone and didn't edit the audio properly and so on, so it might be a bit annoying to use. Naturally, this is not always the case. The fact that something is paid doesn't mean it's good, and the fact that it is free doesn't mean it's bad either. But I think you can expect more from paid resources in general. The final reason it's worth investing money is that sometimes the premium options simply are better and give you access to things that you can't get for free. For example, if you're learning Chinese characters, it can help immensely to have access to reliable information, and there simply isn't a free app that gives you that. So in this case, it's not that investing money makes learning more enjoyable or more convenient, it's that it unlocks benefits that simply aren't available if you only rely on free resources. Now let's have a look at Chinese learning resources worth paying for. And I'll start with those that offer unique benefits, and then we will continue with resources that can be nice to have, make learning more convenient, enjoyable, and so on. So, the first thing I would invest money into if I started learning Chinese from scratch again is a good electronic dictionary with manually recorded audio. A dictionary is a tool you will rely on for the rest of your Chinese learning life, and so having a good one makes a difference. I recommend Pleco or Hanping, and they both have add-ons with manually recorded audio by native speakers. Text-to-speech is pretty good, but it's not good enough to use as a model for pronunciation, and when it comes to single and two-syllable words, there is no reason to rely on text-to-speech either. You can also consider buying expansion dictionaries for specific purposes for these apps, which is a nice segue into the next thing you might want to consider spending money on, namely reliable information about Chinese characters. There are two types of information that you want access to here. So first, you want to be able to look up characters to see how they are constructed, what are the functional components, and so on. And the second is that you want to learn about the system, about the writing system itself. For both of these, I recommend Outlier Linguistics. They have an awesome character dictionary that you should check out. I've reviewed it on Hacking Chinese, and I'll put a link in the show notes. When it comes to understanding the Chinese writing system, I have written a free series of articles about this, but if you want something more in-depth and more reliable and accurate, you should check out Outlier's Chinese Character Masterclass. Again, this is a good example where you can find some information free online, but it's hard to know how reliable it is. If you purchase Outlier Linguistics Dictionary or enroll in their course, you can be sure that the information you get is reliable and will help you understand how Chinese characters really work. Moving on to the next resource, and this is for the beginners out there, get a good textbook. There's a lot of debate online whether or not textbooks are good, but if you just started learning, textbooks will help you solve certain issues. Without a textbook, you need to make so many decisions on your own, what to study, how to study, when to study it, and so on. And this will take up so much time and create so much anxiety that it's simply not worth it. So for all the beginners listening, get a good textbook. Once you've gone through this textbook, you will be in a better place to decide if you need another textbook or if you feel free going at it on your own. We discussed this question more in episode 158 if you're interested, and if you want recommendations for specific textbooks, I suggest either Integrated Chinese or a course in Contemporary Chinese if you're interested in a Taiwan focus. You can also check out my course, Unlocking Chinese, which is not really a substitute for a textbook or formal course, but where I try to address everything I think you need to know as a beginner to get off to a good start. Next, we have graded readers, and this is for the beginner and intermediate students out there. Graded readers will allow you to build fluency by reading long texts that become easier the more you read rather than harder the more you read, as is the case with most textbooks. If you want concrete recommendations, you can check out Mandarin Companion or Chinese Breeze. You can find reading materials online for free. I just mentioned my collection of free reading materials earlier, but it's not easy to find professionally edited book-length texts online for free. So this is definitely something I think you should consider paying for. Moving on, we have occasional professional tutoring and or coaching. While you can learn Chinese on your own, relying on advice available for free online, it can be immensely helpful to get feedback or be able to ask questions of someone who has done this before, or of a professional teacher who can help you with certain aspects of the language. For example, this could be getting feedback on your pronunciation from me in my pronunciation course, or it could be that you hire a tutor to work on speaking more generally, or something else. This is then not something you have to do all the time, but occasionally checking in with someone, asking questions or getting feedback or figuring out where to head next can be very useful. Finally, we have the most expensive resource, but also the one that has the potential to be the most transformative, namely going abroad. This doesn't guarantee that you will learn Chinese, but being immersed in an environment where Chinese is spoken provides an experience that is very difficult to replicate online. Even if you can create an immersion environment, it's not the same, and some cultural aspects will be different depending on the geographical location. If you have the means to go abroad and learn Chinese by traveling or staying abroad, I think this is an opportunity you should take. Even a short stay can be transformative. However, remember that how much you learn depends on what you do, not where you are, so it's possible to also live abroad or travel without learning much at all. As mentioned, this is also by far the most expensive way of learning Chinese, so do consider your options before going. For a more detailed discussion about traveling to learn Chinese, check out episode 149. So those were some resources that I think offer a unique benefit for Chinese learners, and where there are certain downsides relying on free content only. Now let's have a look at resources that can make learning more convenient or enjoyable, but that aren't required as such, or where there are good free alternatives. First, we have AI chatbots, and I was very close to putting this in the first category as something that you really should do. And if I re-record this episode in 6 months or a year, maybe it will be in that category. Using generative AI such as ChatGPT can be very good for learning Chinese. You can get instant feedback on things you write, ask questions, make it check your writing, and so on. While you can use chatbots for free as well, this is usually limited in terms of how much you can use them, and maybe also they use a less advanced model. Next up, we have podcast transcripts, and this is something I think isn't strictly necessary. I think podcasts are mostly for listening practice, and when you do listening practice, you should primarily be listening, not reading. That doesn't mean that it's bad to have a transcript, however, because if you want to look something up or check your understanding after you've listened, having access to the transcript is easier. And as I mentioned in an example earlier, if you don't have the transcript, you have to generate it yourself, and this can be time-consuming and a bit frustrating. Next, I think students should at least consider regular tutoring or coaching. I mentioned occasional tutoring and coaching before, and that's something I really think most students should get if they can. But regular tutoring and coaching is something that will obviously cost more money, but can also be beneficial. Naturally, most of your learning time will still be you on your own, reading, listening, and engaging with the language, but getting regular help from somebody else can be valuable. Moving on to the next category, we have niche reading and listening materials. If the topic doesn't matter for you, you can probably find good listening and reading content without trying too hard. That is completely free. But if you're interested in something very specific, or you want a certain approach or a certain tool that can help you with this, then it could be worth paying for as well. For example, there are many services that provide news in various ways in simplified Chinese, and those you might need to pay for if you want more than the samples. Finally, if you want to learn to write Chinese characters by hand, you should check out Skritter. It gives you feedback on the characters you write, keep track of what you know, and maybe more importantly, it keeps track of what you don't know and what you forget, so you can spend more time on that. As regular listeners know, I also work for Skritter and have done so for a decade now, but I actually used the app to learn characters myself before I started working for Skritter, and I would make the same decision again if I started learning Chinese from scratch. Okay, so that was a rather sprawling discussion about various tools and resources for learning Chinese that you might want to consider paying money for. If you end up doing so will depend on your learning situation, who you are, and obviously how much money you have to invest. If you're a poor student, it's not really in the cards to go to China for 3 months just to practice your Chinese, and having an expensive monthly subscription for an app maybe isn't an option either. In that case, maybe identify 1 or 2 resources that you really would benefit a lot from, and then use free resources for everything else. Like I said, you don't actually need to pay for anything. You can learn Chinese completely for free. If you're not a poor student, it still depends on your learning situation. If you have somebody nearby to practice speaking with every day, then maybe you don't need to hire someone to practice speaking with you. But if you struggle with pronunciation and the native speaker you ask can't explain what you are doing wrong or help you improve, well, maybe then it is time to hire a professional. Before wrapping up this episode, I'd like to remind you of something I said earlier. Just because a resource is free doesn't mean it's bad, and just because it costs money, it doesn't mean it's good. There are in fact resources that cost a lot of money, but that won't do much for your Chinese. But that's a topic I'll save for another episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.